Wow, what a beautiful evening. Thank you for making this so special, our Teen Tefillah team. Friends, have you ever wondered why my father, a rabbi, and my Jewish educator mother would have named their firstborn son after a Christian apostle? The answer is that my grandfather, Paul, died unfortunately before I was born. But although they went with Paul for my English name, they drew the line at bestowing upon me his Hebrew name, which just happens to be the title of our Torah portion this Shabbat, Pinchas. Why? Because in last week's Torah portion, Pinchas, a religious zealot, slays a woman, kills her in a fit of righteous, indeed perhaps not so righteous, anger. So instead, they searched for a more modern and a more fitting name. As it turns out, for about 10 minutes in 1957, Israeli parents were naming their male children Pe'eri, which comes from the Hebrew word for magnificent. So obviously, it was the perfect name for me. Alas, by the time I got to Tel Aviv University, no one in Israel had ever heard that name. And so when I introduced myself as Pe'eri, the Israeli students would give me a strange look and say, "Your parents named you fruit?" Fruit as in borei pri hagafen. "No, not fruit," I insisted. "Magnificent, magnificent." Still, they would walk away shaking their heads. What kind of meshugana parents would name their son fruit? So now, whenever I am in Israel, I just use my middle name and ask them to call me Micha. At least that is a name that they recognize. But back to Pinchas and his murderous rage. To add insult to injury, literally, our portion this week is entitled Pinchas because the narrative continues with God rewarding him for his act of violence, even going so far as to refer to it as a brit shalom, a covenant of peace. Now, I am not the only rabbi to be perplexed by this. The Hasidic Rebbe B.Y. Natan surmises that in the time that passed between last week's Torah portion and this week's portion, Pinchas must have changed his ways, finding peaceful ways to deal with his ire. Be that as it may, God's approval of Pinchas's aggression is even more confounding since it contrasts so starkly with another story in our Torah portion this week, that of the daughters of Zelophehad. Like Pinchas, they too were angry, and rightly so. After their father dies, leaving no sons, the 5 daughters are left destitute, since there are no males to inherit the family estate. But unlike Pinchas, they funnel their anger productively and peacefully into concerted political action. They form a pact and head to Washington to lobby their congressional representatives. Not really. Indeed, they only had to lobby Moses and the high priest. But it worked. God instructs Moses to grant the daughters their land, which set the precedent that Israelite women had the right to inherit property, quite an amazing breakthrough for women's suffrage all the way back in the 11th century BCE. And I bring this all to you this evening because I believe that the great challenge of our time is to figure out how to channel our righteous anger according to the role models provided by Machla, Noah, Hogla, Milcah, and Tirzah, and not that of Pinchas. The biblical Pinchas, I mean. I understand that my grandfather was a very gentle soul. I must confess to you, however, that these days I often find myself angry. Angry over every expression of anti-Semitism and racism, over the myriad threats to our democracy, and over each and every one of the now ubiquitous mass shootings that our nation has had to endure, including how many just this past week. But as much as I hate being angry, hate the way it affects my psyche, my family, my friends, and my dinner parties, I am even more terrified of getting to the point where I will no longer hear the cries of innocent Ukrainian civilians over the sounds of the much more inviting Wimbledon tennis tournament on TV. Of course, it is not just our political lives that are challenging. Sometimes it is our personal lives as well. This week, my auto lease ran out, and I had to shop for a new car. Now that is a process that would drive even a tzaddik abyssal meshuggah. So let me get this straight. You want me to sit here for 45 minutes while you pretend to go negotiate with your manager. And yet, the Pirkei Avot teaches us that we must not succumb to our anger. Who is strong, it asks. And the answer is, he who can control his anger. Or in the case of the daughters of Zelophehad, she who controls her anger. But how? If you were to pose this question to my yoga teacher, the answer would be to simply come to my breath, to breathe deeply in and out. But for the last few weeks, I couldn't even do that because of the smoke emanating from the wildfires in Canada. And I'm angry about that too. Why is no one taking action to save our planet for this new beautiful baby that we've named, or this one in the front row, or these incredible members of the Teen Tefillah team? It's infuriating. Still, I will share the one strategy that does seem to help me in this regard. You see, I have come to believe that the difference between the daughters of Zelophehad and Pinchas is that the daughters took a deep breath before they acted on their frustration, whereas Pinchas just rushed right in. Now, the only proof text that I could find for this theory was in a very rare edition of a midrash entitled The Mishigas of Rabbi Yedwab. But nonetheless, I think it holds some truth. Recently, a very successful business person who I happen to know from my yoga classes came into my study for counsel. Turns out she was unfairly slandered publicly by a business competitor. Upon investigation, her attorney uncovered a great deal of evidence proving that the libel was not only false, but also malicious. They urged her to file a lawsuit which would enable her to clear her name publicly and come away with a hefty settlement to boot. Upon hearing the full story, I became increasingly angry on her behalf. "Sue the bum," I wanted to yell, but I held my tongue and listened. Finally, as the hour drew to a close, I asked, "So, Nu, what are you going to do?" She paused for a long moment, and then very serenely she responded, "I am going to come to my breath." I must say that considering her profound anger and hurt, I was astonished at her choice. But as it turns out, she was right. And I am happy to report that she is now doing quite well and completely satisfied with her decision. Gam ze ya'avor, she told me at one point in our conversation, this too shall pass. And it did. This is a truth that our Lamaze teacher taught quite profoundly when Wendy and I were going for our prenatal classes many years ago. When the time came and the contractions were coming strong, I did as I had been instructed. I coached Wendy to begin her Lamaze breathing, which reminded her that her discomfort was impermanent and that the pain would pass. And it worked quite well, right up until she called for the epidural. Now, for those of you who do not practice yoga or Lamaze, let me offer you a very effective and easy means of accomplishing this type of relaxation at home. It is called 4-7-8 breathing. Breathing in through your nose for 4 counts, holding your breath for 7, and then exhaling forcefully through your mouth for 8. 4-7-8. Although the scientific studies are only scanty at this point, this form of intentional breathing does seem to have the measurable effect of lowering one's blood pressure and heart rate. I have tested it at home with my own monitor, and it works remarkably well. This physiological response, in turn, helps to calm frayed nerves and to avoid impulsive actions, even impulsive eating. And for me, as a 66-year-old man, most importantly, it helps me get back to sleep when I find myself inexplicably awake at 2 o'clock in the morning. And we can practice now if you'd like. Really, just for a minute. Don't be scared, it won't hurt. Just close your eyes gently and simply breathe in through your nose for 4 counts. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then hold that breath for 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Then breathe out through your mouth for 8. Relax for a moment and try it again. In for 4. Hold for 7. Out for 8. The prescription is to try this for 4 cycles whenever you feel temptation, anger, or stress. It will even help avoid road rage, but don't close your eyes first if you're driving. That would be bad. Look, I know we are all feeling helpless these days, and breathing in and out is not going to resolve all the world's problems. But it just may help us to act more like the daughters of Zelophehad, channeling our righteous anger into effective action rather than exploding violently like my almost namesake, Pinchas. So, on this Shabbat dedicated to Pinchas, I prefer instead to look at the example of the daughters of Zelophehad and to thank God for the gift of our breath, which may serve to guide us toward powerful acts of peace as we endeavor together to turn our world around. Shabbat Shalom.